You know, the whole digital revolution, it promised to connect every single one of us, to shrink the globe into this amazing village of shared knowledge and opportunity. But what if that promise came with a hidden cost? What if the very tools that were supposed to bring us together are actually digging deeper, more complex divisions than we've ever seen before? Let's get into it.
So, on one hand, you have the dream, a truly connected world. But then you have the reality, especially for the global south, which is a world of pretty shocking digital inequality. I mean, while some of us are leaping forward into the age of AI, so many others are still just fighting for a reliable internet connection. This isn't just a gap anymore, it's a chasm, and it's getting wider.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll tackle the central paradox of digital progress. Then we'll look at the divide on 3 different levels. After that, we'll trace its historical roots, face the huge new challenge of AI, and finally ask what it's going to take to actually build some digital bridges.
Okay, let's start with that paradox, because it's a big one. You see, in the global south, bringing in new digital tech doesn't automatically fix old inequalities. In fact, if you don't have the right conditions in place, it can make things worse. It's like it amplifies the advantages for those already ahead and leaves everyone else even further behind.
But here's the thing, this is not just a tech problem. Not at all. The seeds of the digital divide we see today, they were planted a long time ago. Think about it. Colonial-era infrastructure problems, ongoing economic challenges, and political instability, all of that created this sort of fertile ground for inequality the technology is now growing on top of.
So how do we make sense of this divide? Well, a really helpful way is to think about it in 3 distinct levels. This shows us that, hey, this is about so much more than just whether or not you have a phone in your pocket.
And here they are: access, skills, and benefits. You can almost think of it like leveling up in a game. First, you need the gear, the technology itself. Then you need to know how to use it. And finally, the real goal is to turn that use into actual, tangible improvements in your life.
So, level 1, access, is the most basic one. This is the classic gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's all about the fundamental building blocks. Do you have reliable broadband? Is your electricity on all day? Can you even afford a smartphone or a computer? For millions and millions of people, the answer is still no.
But let's say you clear that hurdle. You've got a device, you've got internet. Well, now you hit the second divide: skills. This is that gap in digital literacy. And you know, it's one thing to scroll through TikTok. It's a completely different thing to use digital tools effectively and safely to find a job, get an education, or manage your money.
And that brings us to the third and maybe the most important level: benefits. Because you can have access and you can have the skills, but still not see any real improvement in your life. The real question is this: can people actually translate their digital activity into better jobs, better health, and a stronger voice in their community? This is where the deepest inequalities really show up.
Now, the real kicker is that these 3 levels aren't just a simple checklist you can tick off. No, they're all interconnected. If you don't have access, you can't build skills. If you don't have skills, you're not going to get the benefits. It creates this vicious cycle of digital exclusion that can be incredibly hard to break.
And to really understand why that cycle is so strong, we have to look back in time. The inequalities we're dealing with today didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They have some seriously deep historical roots.
I mean, even the way we talk about the problem has evolved. Back in the 90s, it was all about who had a PC and a dial-up connection. By the early 2000s, we realized, oh, wait, skills matter just as much. And now, today, the whole conversation has shifted to the ultimate outcome: who is actually benefiting from this whole digital revolution.
And this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of it. The lack of investment in really basic stuff like public utilities and education during colonial periods, it meant the starting line was already unequal from day one. And a lot of modern digital infrastructure is just being built right on top of those old, shaky foundations.
Let's make this real with an example. Take a look at Pakistan. The gap between cities and rural areas is huge. Before the pandemic, you had almost half the urban population with internet access, but that number drops to just over a quarter in rural areas. That's not just a statistic, that represents millions of people cut off from opportunity.
And this is not an isolated case. Look at Brazil. Even with way higher connectivity overall, you still see this massive gap between the cities and the countryside. This same pattern plays out again and again across the global south, and it just highlights this systemic problem with infrastructure and investment. So just as we're trying to get a handle on this digital divide, a new, way more complex challenge is showing up on the horizon, the AI divide. If the internet created a chasm, AI is threatening to create a Grand Canyon.
The barriers to get into the AI game are just incredibly high. We're talking massive costs, super specialized infrastructure, and an elite skill set that most education systems in the global south just aren't set up to provide. And that's not even touching on the really complex stuff, like biased algorithms, job losses, and some very serious human rights concerns.
And that's because AI is only as good as the data you feed it, right? So imagine an AI system that's built in Silicon Valley to approve business loans. It's trained on data from people with formal, salary jobs. Now you take that same AI and use it in a country where most people work in the informal economy. Well, it might just deny perfectly good candidates because their work history doesn't fit the pattern it was taught. That's algorithmic bias in a nutshell.
Okay, so the scale of this problem is huge, but it's not impossible to solve. So let's shift gears and focus on the solutions. How do we actually start building some bridges across this chasm?
So what is the path forward? Well, there's no single silver bullet here. What we need is a coordinated strategy, and it's really built on 3 key pillars. First, infrastructure. That means expanding reliable internet and making devices affordable. That's the foundation. Second, education. We need a massive investment in digital literacy for everybody, not just for kids in school, but for all ages. And third, governance. This means developing ethical rules for things like AI with direct input from local communities to make sure this tech actually serves people, not the other way around. At the end of the day, no single group can solve this alone. It's got to be a true partnership. Governments need to create the right policies, the private sector needs to invest and innovate responsibly, and local communities absolutely have to be at the table to make sure the solutions are relevant and actually work on the ground.
It all comes down to this. We can't fix the digital divide with just more tech, because it was never just a tech problem to begin with. It's a mirror reflecting these much deeper historical inequalities. If we want to build digital bridges that are actually going to last, we have to fix those foundational cracks in society too. Otherwise, we're just building on sand.
Which leaves us with a really big final question. We are standing at a crossroads. Technology has this incredible potential to either create a more fair and equitable future for everyone, or to become the ultimate tool of division, locking in global inequality for generations to come. The path we choose really depends on the actions we all decide to take, starting today.